Hello my fellow creative spirits. So for today's video, I am going to be doing these little paintings. I decided to take the day to go to the local park and do something that's a little bit different. Now if you're usually here for my sculptures, I will be doing a sculpture video very soon. Arteza decided to sponsor this video and send me some lovely gouache paints. I had been looking around for some gouache paints for a while, and these were the perfect fit. It is a set of 60 that have a lot of beautiful colors as well as some pearl finishes, which I wanted to use because I like to have a variation in finish in my final product. I also used some beautiful wood panels that are 8 inches by 8 inches. I bought the pack of 5 and these are just the perfect size to do these smaller pieces. Arteza is going to be giving my viewers a 10% off coupon as well as links to the products in the description. You can also check out the Arteza YouTube channel, which has a lot of lovely ideas if you want to do some more projects. Today I wanted to talk a bit about my process and how I created this piece. This is just the formula that I have been using as of late to create these paintings. I decided to go to the park to get some inspiration from the flora and fauna that I see. I just wanted to choose something that had the tones of the garden to inspire me, so it was really nice to be there and work. So as of late, the first step that I take in creating this piece is that I like to start with a bit of an abstract background. So the way that I do the abstract background is that I first pick out a color palette. So for this piece in particular, I wanted to do it kind of monochromatic, maybe with a little bit of a complementary color. So the color, as you can see, is very green. So I used the Arteza colors in olive green, as well as a lot of sap green and some of the opposite color to tone down the green, and then some yellows and whites. And then in the center where I was going to be putting the face, I also laid a base of a pearlescent white color, and that'll just really draw the eye into the center. Now for the background, I am mainly just trying to get it as visually pleasing as possible, as if it were just an abstract painting. And this is where I just really play with the water. I really load up my brush with tons of water and let the paint drip onto the canvas, as well as spread it around and blend in the different shades. The cool thing about gouache is that it is kind of like watercolor in that when you use the water, it does reanimate the paint and you can move it around as much as you want, but it's also opaque enough that you can layer it. I also really love the finish of gouache. I feel like you can get very realistic style faces if you wanted to, and it also has a beautiful matte finish, and then you can make some parts pop by using some of the more pearl finish. So in this piece in particular, I was planning on doing the pearl finish on the face highlights as well as on the hair and the glitter that I was going to put around her. I really like to do the abstract part and take my time with it. I like to kind of give it a vignette effect, so I like to add the darker colors on the outside and make it more blurry in the outskirts of the painting, and then really make that bright light color in the center to really bring your eye in. If you don't like a certain part of the background, you can always just change it later because it does have that opaque characteristic. Once I finished blocking in the background, I decided to head home and work on the central subject. Now before I put in the face, I decided to draw it up in my sketchbook. So I have a couple of different techniques for making my own faces. The first that I really like to do is to make my own face loosely basing it off of a reference. So I had found a picture of a woman at 3/4 view, and I really liked the lighting in the photograph. However, I wanted to make it my own proportions. I like to use like doll-like proportions sometimes, and so that's what I decided to do. I kind of just adjusted things in my sketchbook as I see fit. Again, loosely basing it off of the reference for lighting. I've been practicing faces so much since I began doing art, so I don't have to rely so much on the reference for exact proportions, though I think that that is a wonderful way to practice as well if you wanted to try replicating someone's face in particular. And you could also try to challenge yourself to not use a reference at all and just create the face. I think once you begin to practice faces, you'll be able to have a better idea of the proportions as well as the shading and the facial features. So once I have finished the face that I invented using the reference, I decided to transfer that to the abstracted background. You can either freehand if you want to challenge yourself, or you can use a transfer method where you use tracing paper to transfer the image onto the canvas. Now when we begin to paint the face, I like to keep the same color palette that I already have on there. So because the center was a bit of a pearl color, I decided to go in with the same pearl white colors, as well as adding a little bit of the complement, as well as using some of the complementary color to green, such as like some peaches and some of the red tones for the blush, as well as a red lip. Also, keeping your color palette limited or planning your color palette ahead of time will help things keep from getting muddy. Though I will admit I do like a bit of a muddy color palette myself. So I tend to like to add the highlights first and then go in with the shadows and then work in the midtones. And you just want to keep adding layers and layers and layers. I feel like the more layers that you get in, the more you will begin to like the painting. At least in my case, I feel that sometimes when I feel uninspired by the piece I'm working on, which I did feel at many points during this painting, I was like, okay, if I just keep going and I just keep painting, eventually I will get it to a place where I am happy. And it did eventually come. It just took a lot of layers. Now to get the ethereal look, that like really fairy-like finish that I wanted to, I did a couple of different things. So the first thing I did was really emphasize those highlights. I like to make these paint highlights almost as if it's reflective on her lower eyelid. So it almost looks like tears, but it's not. It's kind of like a reflection that makes it look like almost like she has a shimmer on her eye. And I also like to add that to the top eyelid as well. Another place where you might consider adding this highlight is on the nose. So at the very tip of your nose, you would have a bit of a reflection, and I like to emphasize nose tip reflection. Other places where you can add a pop of highlight that I did was on the brow bone, as well as right above the upper lip. And if you really want to try studying different types of lighting. I feel that lighting is so important to creating a visually stunning piece. So you want to try to figure out how to emphasize the lighting in your piece and maybe go beyond just the simple front lit type of subject. So I really like pieces that are backlit. So in this piece, she has a bit of backlighting as well. So I really emphasized the side of her face that would be backlit, as well as her hair. And in addition to the highlight, I also decided to mix in some more yellow to also bring the eye closer and add more saturation to the subject. So another way I made this a little bit more ethereal was by adding some sparkles. So I added these little dots around her to almost look like sometimes when I see and I'm in a garden and it's about golden hour, you'll see like everything tends to sparkle a little bit more. So I wanted to kind of capture that beauty of like early morning golden glow, or right before the sunset golden glow when you're in the garden, where everything's just a little bit hazy and everything's really golden. I also like to add a bit of blush to the nose bridge. This is, again, all of this tends to be my personal preference. It's something that I like to see. So feel free to adapt in any way that you like. But I like to add some freckles and a little bit of sun-kissed glow to her face, just to give her an extra glow on top of that, to really draw the eye in. I also added, of course, some English ivy in the area surrounding her. So I just looked at some reference pictures online to see exactly how the English ivy looked at different angles. I wanted to add variation to make sure it doesn't look like copy pasted of the same leaf. I kind of wanted some to be folding in different directions, as well as different hues and tones depending on where it was. But again, trying to keep that abstracted look. I was a bit strategic in the placement of the English ivy leaves. I tried to make it follow the golden ratio, in which it's kind of like a swirl. So leading your eye to the centralmost subject, you want to kind of swirl it around into that. And this is just one specific technique in creating a composition, but it's one that I tend to find the easiest to follow. And finally, what I did with this piece was I added the final touches. So the final touches in this piece in particular was adding a lot of wispy little hairs everywhere and kind of fading them out, and using water to reanimate the wispy hairs to kind of blend them out. I feel like things that aren't completely in the center, I like to have blurred out a little bit more so that it looks a little more dreamy. So I like to blur out those leaves a little bit, also by reanimating with a little bit of water on a paintbrush. Not to completely erase the detail, but just to blur ever so slightly. I also love the James Jean-esque type of melty effect that he does that's with line work that looks a little bit illustrative. So I like to add a little bit of that illustrative melty effect around her as well. Again, being very subtle so as to not draw away attention from the centralmost subject, which is her face. I just like to add those melty effects using different tones that I already have there, but just melting them together. And this has been one of the funnest techniques that I've been working with lately as well, which is just playing with bending the reality around something that would usually be crisp and be 100% realistic. I also really love the gold because I added a bit of a gold tone that you can see at certain angles. And so I call this piece English Ivy because I think that this is what English Ivy would look like in my imagination if English Ivy was a person. I really love going out to gardens, so I also highly recommend going to a garden and checking it out and maybe seeing if there's a plant that you gravitate towards. What do you think that plant would look like if it were a person? This isn't what I do every single time that I paint, but this was just how I created this one. I highly recommend you give it a try if you'd like to. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at ShumakerArt if you do decide to use any of my tips. I want to give a huge thank you again to Arteza for sponsoring today's video. If you guys liked today's video, just let me know. I'd love to make more paintings if you guys want to see them, and I will see you guys very soon for a new sculpture video. Thank you again so much. Check out the links in the description, and I will see you guys next time.